The story begins with our protagonist, who found himself transported into the world of Sylvania's failed swordmaster, a fantasy game centered around Tale, a failed swordsman at Sylvania Academy. In the game, Tale struggles through countless trials, eventually rising to become a true swordmaster, destined to save the world. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. He wasn't Tale. He wasn't even an important side character. He was Ed Roth-Staler, a third-rate villain destined to be removed from the story early on. But giving up wasn't an option. He had knowledge of the future, of every major incident and shattered fate that would unfold in the Academy. If the world saw him as a disposable obstacle, then fine. He would be an obstacle too troublesome to remove. Back in the present, our protagonist, now transported into the game as Ed, sat in his room, staring at the letter in his hands. So, in short, they're disowning me? He sighed, rubbing his temples. If he had a cigar, now would be the perfect time to take a dramatic puff. His name was Ed Roth-Staler, and his life had just taken a nosedive as he was kicked out of his dorm. Outside, students whispered behind his back, casting judgmental glances. "Serves him right," one muttered. "Tampering with the entrance exam? Good riddance." Ed, or rather the soul now occupying his body, disagreed entirely. He wasn't that Ed. He had been transported into Sylvania. Failed swordmaster, his favorite game. Except instead of getting the overpowered protagonist slot, he was stuck as a disposable villain with the survival rate of a snowman in a heat wave. Worse still, the original Ed had been nothing short of an arrogant disgrace, so his reputation was already in the gutter. Looking at his status screen didn't make things better. His magic was garbage, his strength was laughable, and even a random farmer NPC probably had better stats. The worst part? He vaguely remembered seeing this character in the game's credits. Homeless, a total wreck. An ending he definitely wasn't going to accept. Determined to survive, Ed grabbed his suitcase and set off toward the wilderness, dodging the judgmental stares of his former peers. The academy, spread across an entire island, was more of a city than a school, and its northeastern outskirts were nothing but forest. Walking for half a day gave him time to process his situation. He wasn't expelled, just kicked out of his dorm. That meant he still had a shot at graduating, and with his meta-knowledge of the game, that was his best chance at securing a future. First, though, he needed food, shelter, and money. He scrounged through his suitcase, some clothes, a dagger, and a goblet. Great. He could probably survive a week, so he started by collecting wood to build his shelter. For food, he attempted to cook tree bark, convincing himself it might be edible. Spoiler, it was not. By day 3, he was malnourished, sick, and questioning his life choices. Wood is for building, not eating. Lesson learned. Shaking off his misery, he focused on crafting a shelter, realizing he had a knack for it. Way better than his magic, at least. The game system even rewarded him with a skill notification. Encouraged, he forged a makeshift harpoon and waded into the river. "I just want to eat real food," he shouted, spearing at the water like a madman. Hunger-fueled determination finally paid off when he caught some fish, cooking them over a fire as he counted down the days until the semester started. 1 week to go. If he could survive this, he'd be fine, or so he thought. Just as he took a bite of his hard-earned meal, a voice interrupted him. He turned, his stomach dropping. Of all the people to find him here, why did it have to be her? Standing before him was Princess Pania, the very person who got him kicked out of the dorms. Memories of her cold words resurfaced. "You haven't shown the slightest bit of remorse. Get out of this academy." Back in the present, she glared at him. "You're still here?" Ed groaned internally. Great. Just what he needed. Trouble, right when he was starting to get comfortable. Ed wasn't just some disposable villain. He was a well-documented disposable villain. In Sylvania failed Swordmaster, his original self had been an arrogant fool who harassed a childhood friend of the protagonist, and then, out of pure spite, tried to sabotage the entrance exam. Too bad for him. The one who caught him in the act was none other than Princess Pania, the third princess of the Crowell Empire, whose special ability allowed her to see through lies. Ed, the original one, got what was coming to him, kicked out of the dorms and scorned by everyone at the academy. Unfortunately, this Ed, the new and improved one, was now dealing with the aftermath. Standing before him, full of righteous fury, Pania was ready to personally see him expelled. Meanwhile, Ed was watching his hard-earned fish burn to a crisp. One disaster at a time, please. Thinking fast, he turned the situation around, pointing out that a high-ranking noble like her shouldn't be wandering around alone in the wilderness. Pania, still wary, tried to warn Ed not to pull anything suspicious, but before she could finish, he suddenly knelt down with a smile. "I am truly grateful to you, Your Highness." Caught off guard, she instinctively activated her ability, only to confirm he was telling the truth. And, surprisingly, he was. Because, really, he was grateful to her. The Rothstaler family, known for their corruption and even human experimentation, had been doomed to ruin. Being disowned meant he had narrowly escaped their fate. Sure, he was broke, starving, and sleeping in a pile of leaves, but hey, long-term survival prospects were looking slightly less grim. Ed quickly realized why Pania was out here. She was taking part in a class assignment exam, a brutal test designed to separate the elite from the, well, future Class F students. If Pania aimed for Class A, she needed to find a magic marble with low mana. Knowing this, Ed slyly directed her to a hidden location, where she'd find his so-called gift. True to form, Pania remained skeptical, but checked anyway. And sure enough, there it was. However, this was no gift. The reason Pania had hidden her identity during the entrance exam in the first place was because she was embarrassed about the privileges she might receive. She wanted to achieve things through her own merit. The moment she laid eyes on the marble, she sensed the truth, but she couldn't take it. She hadn't truly found it on her own. The title, Princess of Benevolence, which she would earn in the future, wouldn't be based on her stats or skills, but on the righteous decision she made. And what Ed had done was bait the princess into making a choice. Whether or not he lied didn't matter. Pania had the ability to discern lies, after all. Even if Ed had been dishonest, she was confident she would prove him wrong by getting into Class A on her own. But the truth was, Ed hadn't lied, and when she failed to be assigned to Class A, she found herself unable to do anything about it. As the Academy's new semester began, Ed found himself sprinting from his makeshift shelter at dawn just to make it on time. He arrived at the grand opening ceremony, where students whispered and gossiped about him, as if he were a ghost that refused to stay buried. Undeterred, he did what any rational person would do, helped himself to as much steak as humanly possible. If people were going to talk about him anyway, he might as well eat like a king. His only goal? Graduate, survive. But not everyone dismissed him so easily. A pink-haired girl watching from a distance murmured, "How strange. It's like he's a completely different person." Well, she wasn't wrong. Ed had barely survived the first day of the semester when he found himself in the dean's office, courtesy of Princess Pania. Luckily, she didn't go full executioner mode, but it was still a close call. He needed to be extra careful to stick to the game's timeline. His main priorities now? Survival, basic magic training, and mastering a weapon. Given his trash-tier magic, archery seemed like the best bet, crafting his own arrows and maybe even infusing them with magic down the line. While hunting, he managed to shoot a rabbit, but was startled to find a girl watching him. Yennecar Polarover, a genius second-year elementalist, greeted him with way too much enthusiasm, popping up in front of him like some teleporting ghost. "You must be the interesting boy Marilda mentioned," Yennecar beamed. Ed glanced at the dead rabbit in his hand. Fantastic. Just what I needed, a high-ranking forest spirit keeping tabs on me. Sensing his unease, Yennecar reassured him. "Don't worry, the spirit isn't bothered by it. Hunting is just part of nature." Ed, feeling a little embarrassed, muttered, "I guess you can't judge a giant, scary-looking wolf by its cover." That piqued Yennecar's interest. His description of Marilda was surprisingly accurate. Excited, she extended her hand. "Here, look. I made a contract with her just yesterday." But as Ed stared at the empty space where the spirit was supposed to be, he sighed. "I really don't want to get tangled up with one of the main characters." Then, shaking his head, he said flatly, "I don't understand what you mean. I don't see spirits." Yennecar blinked. "You can't see spirits?" she asked, clearly surprised. Deciding he had no interest in getting involved with a key figure in the game's story, Ed made a quick exit. As he walked away, Yennecar curiously muttered, "What an interesting person. Who is he really?" Clearly, this wasn't the last time they'd cross paths. With no dorm and no money, Ed had to structure his days like a survivalist. Each morning, he sprinted from his forest shelter to class, which, while exhausting, at least boosted his stats. After a full day of studying, borrowing textbooks, and washing his sweat-stained uniform in the river, he had to gather firewood, check his food supply, and prep for the next day. 4 hours of sleep was a luxury. Unfortunately, someone had been following him. "How long are you going to keep tailing me?" he finally snapped, catching Yennecar off guard. When Yennecar asked why everyone hated him, Ed brushed it off. The best way to avoid forming deep connections, especially with someone destined to be the final boss of Act 1, was to exploit a known weakness: money. Despite being a top student, Yennecar came from a poor farming family. So, when Ed casually asked for help, she seemed excited, until he mentioned borrowing money. Her cheerful demeanor vanished instantly. "Sorry," she muttered in a dead tone. The plan worked. She backed off. 3 days later, Ed continued hunting, satisfied that he had dodged major plot entanglements. That peace only lasted until he found a girl sleeping in his shelter, Lucy Mayriel, a student praised by professors, feared by classmates, and the strongest character in Sylvania's failed swordmaster. As Lucy lazily opened her eyes, she didn't even acknowledge him at first, instead muttering about how noisy things were. Confused, Ed started to explain he hadn't made any noise, but Lucy interrupted. "Not you, that," she motioned behind him. Ed turned and his blood ran cold. Lucy sighed. "That big blue thing behind you won't shut up. It keeps asking you to save Yennecar." Ed turned back, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing. "I don't see anything. More importantly, why was she sleeping in his shelter?" Lucy, as if she had finished her divine duty, promptly went back to sleep. Ed, exasperated, yelled at her to stay awake. But it was pointless. That's when he realized the problem. Lucy could go anywhere. With her small size and ability to walk on air, she floated around campus like a stray cat, napping in whatever spot suited her. His shelter, isolated and near a peaceful stream, was basically a luxury 5-star resort for skipping class. He had only himself to blame for choosing such a prime nap location. The next day, Ed set up a snare trap to catch some prey, only for Lucy to appear out of nowhere. "Can I have some jerky?" she asked. Ed, knowing full well that denying her meant nothing, still tried. She ignored him and took it anyway. Clearly she had no respect for boundaries. Ed had read every guide, and all of them agreed. Lucy was unbeatable, but there was something about her that people overlooked. "By the way," he said, "on my way here, I overheard some maids from Ophelis looking for you." Lucy's eyes widened in horror. "I just remembered something urgent," she muttered before instantly flying off. Ed smirked. Unbeatable? Maybe. But maids? Her one true weakness. Unfortunately, peace didn't last long. The next day, the joint combat training began, a school-wide event where students from all departments fought one-on-one matches. It included all the major characters: Pania, Lortel, Ziggs, Yennecar, and the protagonist himself, Talie, the so-called failed swordmaster. Ed, knowing how this battle played out, focused entirely on Talie's match. He had gone through so many playthroughs of the game, seen every tragic and triumphant route, and he knew this was a pivotal moment. While lost in thought, Yennecar suddenly popped up beside him. "Hey, Ed," she grinned. He couldn't believe she was still trying to be friendly after he bluntly asked for money. If Lucy was like a stray cat, then Yennecar was more like an overly enthusiastic puppy. She tried to explain the brackets, but he didn't pay much attention until she mentioned, "Don't you want to know who you're up against?" That's when it hit him. Wait, I have to fight too? He glanced at his name. No way. His opponent? Princess Pania. He barely had time to process it before the announcement rang out, calling for the next match. Lucy versus Talie. Excitement sparked in Ed. This was a scene he had played through countless times, but now it was happening in real life. He had resolved to only look out for himself and his own future. But still, he found himself rooting for Talie. But where was Lucy? Scanning the area, he finally spotted her, napping below a spare platform, completely unbothered. Groaning, he stormed over, grabbed her, and shook her awake. "Wake up! Your match is next!" Lucy groggily rubbed her eyes. "I'm hungry. Got any more jerky?" Ed was this close to losing it. The fight began, and in the original story, Talie, who had never held a sword, managed to cut through Lucy's lightning-fast magic. Seizing the opportunity, he closed the distance, shocking Lucy into accidentally casting Lightning Strike, an intermediate-level spell. While Talie was completely defeated, Lucy was disqualified for using advanced magic, making him the first person to ever win against her. That was how it played out in the game. But now, standing in the arena, Ed watched as the scene unfolded before him in real life. Talie struck, but Lucy countered effortlessly, shocking the spectators. Yet, Ed knew in his heart, Talie wasn't someone who gave up. Shaking, he picked up his sword, gripping it tightly, determination burning in his eyes. This was the moment where Talie, despite being cornered, was supposed to push through and prove himself. But something unexpected happened. Lucy didn't use Lightning Strike like she was supposed to. Instead of blasting Talie with her signature move, she blocked his attack and sent him flying with a tornado spell. The battle was over. Lucy won. But that wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ed stood there, stunned. This isn't right. Talie lost? The future he knew was already starting to change. Talie walked away from his match, his spark completely snuffed out. Ed recognized that feeling, the kind of hopelessness that hit when you slammed into an insurmountable wall. If he left Talie alone now, things could spiral in the worst way. This wasn't just about a simple loss. Talie was supposed to win that fight and gain the confidence to pick up the sword. But thanks to Ed's meddling, Lucy had used a different spell, and now the story's entire trajectory was in jeopardy. Panic setting in, Ed ignored everything, even his upcoming match against Princess Pania, and sprinted after Talie, calling out to him, "Your efforts will pay off. Don't beat yourself up over this." He didn't know if it would actually help, but anything was better than nothing. The protagonist needed to believe in himself. If Talie lost hope, then Ed was the one who'd suffer through every insane trial at this academy. And no thank you. That was not happening. Meanwhile, Pania's backstory was revealed, reflecting on her past. She hadn't been born with the ability to detect lies. It was a skill she developed to survive the web of deceit and schemes in the Imperial Palace. It made her strong, but also deeply distrustful. Now, facing Ed in battle, she found herself hesitating, unable to look away. From the sidelines, students whispered, twisting his earlier encouragement to Talie into some bizarre act of mockery. Pania wanted to believe he was still the same manipulative coward, but something about him felt off. When he had followed Talie earlier, his desperation had been sincere. As their duel began, she planned to exchange blows and figure out his true motives. Instead, Ed immediately let her magic hit him, slamming into the ground. "I lost," he announced. The crowd was stunned. Even Pania, expecting a hard-fought match, was completely thrown off. "What?" she asked, baffled. "You saw my attack coming. You could have dodged." But Ed just thanked her, stood up, and walked off, as if he had already moved on. And that's when she realized he hadn't looked her in the eyes even once. With no time to waste, Ed rushed off again, dead set on finding Talie. But of course, Pania intercepted him, demanding to know what was really going on. She was already exhausted from dealing with the Academy's chaos, and now Ed, of all people, was constantly distracting her. Despite her frustrations, she couldn't shake her suspicions. "You wanted to get disowned, didn't you?" she suddenly asked. "You knew about the dark side of House Rothstaler. That's why you did all of this." Ed nearly choked. That was a disturbingly sharp deduction. Half of it was wrong, but still, she was way too close to the truth. Not wanting to give anything away, he played dumb. But Pania wasn't buying it. The more she pushed, the more frustrated she got. Until finally, she activated her insightful eyes. "Say that again," she ordered. Ed smirked. "I just wanted to change my image. Maybe if I cheered for Talie, people would stop hating me." Her ability instantly registered it as a lie. Furious, she stomped the ground, knowing he was hiding something but having no way to prove it. Finally, she let him go, sensing he was in a hurry. Just before leaving, Ed hesitated, then turned back. "You carry an enormous weight on your shoulders," he said. "Maybe it's time you stopped acting like you're still in the Imperial Court. This place isn't full of people trying to deceive you. Try to take it easy." Pania was momentarily stunned. She had spent her life seeing through lies, but this was the first time someone had seen through her. Shaking off the encounter, Ed ran to find Talie, but just as he spotted him, a girl suddenly blocked his path, shouting, "Stop bullying Talie already!" This was none other than Ayla Triss, the main female lead. Great. Another major character thrown into the mix. Whatever doubt or despair Taylor had felt, Ayla had already dragged him out of it. She was, after all, his biggest supporter, his childhood friend, the one who always had his back. Ed watched for a moment before casually throwing out, "Your swordsmanship was impressive." Taylor narrowed his eyes. "What are you playing at?" Yeah, I get it. You all think I'm a scumbag." Ed turned away thinking, I should be more honest with myself. He had spent so much time playing this game, suffering through all of Taylor's hardships and countless playthroughs. Even though he told himself he only cared about survival, a part of him felt relieved when things started returning to the original story. Maybe it wasn't just about the plot anymore. Maybe he actually wanted to see Taylor succeed. Still, he walked away, leaving Taylor and Ayla staring at him in disgust. Yeah, I probably looked way too cool and dramatic just now. My bad. As he made his exit, a boom in the distance caught his attention. Right. That should be happening now. He turned toward the real highlight of the combat training event, Yennecar versus Lortel Keheland, a match that had captured everyone's attention. Yennecar emerged victorious, her classmates cheering as she was surrounded by admirers. Even though she had always been well-liked, this cemented her as one of the Academy's top figures. At least she'll be too busy to visit my camp now, Ed thought, satisfied that her growing popularity would keep her distracted. The past 2 weeks had been peaceful. No major story events, no interfering protagonists. Just Ed focusing on survival, improving his stats, and making steady progress. Life was simple, and then Yennecar showed up again. "Do you like walking around half-naked?" she asked, blushing. Ed, fresh from a swim, shot back, "You're the one who showed up out of nowhere." Apparently she had turned his camp into her own personal hideout, enjoying the secluded area. But she had also come for advice. Ed raised a brow. "Out of everyone, why me?" Yennecar hesitated before admitting she had injured someone during combat training. Her opponent had broken the rules first, but the guilt still gnawed at her. So that's what this is about. While her friends comforted her and insisted she had done nothing wrong, Yennecar wasn't looking for blind support. She wanted someone who would tell her the truth. Ed shrugged. "If apologizing feels right to you, do it." That was all. No long-winded justifications, no biased opinions. She studied him for a moment, smiling. "I knew you were different," she said. "You don't just tell me what I want to hear." The next day, as Ed walked through campus, a cold dread settled in. This is bad. The game's story was notoriously filled with pitfalls, bad endings that could spiral from the tiniest changes. If he did one thing differently, Taylor could die, Ayla could fall off a cliff, or a character's fate could take a horrible turn. He had already changed things, so what else was different? Just as he was deep in thought, a voice called out, "Did you not hear me?" He turned to see a girl watching him with an amused expression. Crap. Lortel Keheland, a business mogul's only daughter, one of the game's major female leads, a ruthless merchant who always had an agenda. "How long do you plan on ignoring me?" she continued, smirking. Ed, fully aware that nothing good could come from dealing with her, sighed. "What do you want?" Lortel's smile widened. "I'd like to purchase 2 hours of your time," Ed Roth Statler. Unlike the other female leads, Lortel had a hidden route, one that positioned her as a villain early on. Unlike Pania, who was naturally revered, Lortel was treated with suspicion, her true nature only becoming apparent later in the game. Ed knew better than to fall into her traps. The moment she appeared, all smiles and pleasantries, he was already planning his escape. But of course, Lortel was relentless. "It wouldn't hurt to hear me out, would it?" she purred. "I'd like to help you out a little." Ed, unimpressed, shot back. "Don't say things you don't mean." Feigning innocence, Lortel smoothly slid 3 gold coins into his coat pocket. Ed thought, 3 gold coins? That's what some people make in a month. Lortel smiled. "You've been spending a lot of time with Yennecar lately," she added. "Maybe you could help me befriend her?" Ah, so that's the play. Ed had already guessed she was preparing for a political showdown with Princess Pania for control over the academy. She was building alliances, and he was just another piece to recruit. Lortel believed that desperate people would sell their pride, their morals, or even themselves for a single coin. Too bad she picked the wrong guy. He wordlessly took the coins and shoved them right back into her hands. For the first time, Lortel looked genuinely intrigued. "How interesting," she murmured, watching him walk away. That night, Lortel wasn't discouraged. She simply shifted her focus to Yenneker. Playing on her guilt, she approached her with an apology. Yenneker, who was kind to a fault, listened, but her response caught Lortel off guard. "You tried to bribe Ed earlier, didn't you?" Lortel froze. "How did she—" "Spirits are chatty," Yenneker smiled. "They tell me everything." Then, in a single blow to Lortel's pride, Yenneker added, "I thought what Ed did was much more touching." Lortel barely reacted, but internally, she had to rethink her entire approach. Yenneker wasn't a naive fairy tale protagonist who could be manipulated. She understood the world's darkness and still chose to remain cheerful. That makes her even more dangerous. The next morning, Ed was finishing up his daily survival routine, drying his clothes, organizing supplies, when a maid suddenly appeared. Not just any maid, Belmaya, the senior Ophilis Hall maid who had personally kicked him out of the dorms. "I knew you were living here," she said, glancing at his makeshift camp. "Lady Yenneker speaks often of you." Ed tensed. Great. Now even the maids know about me. But then, something caught his eye. Her basket. The maids of Ophilis Hall weren't just workers, they were elite. That basket was filled with high-quality, freshly gathered ingredients, not something you'd find in books. Ed's priorities shifted immediately. "So, about that basket?" he asked, shamelessly. What started as a tense meeting turned into an educational session on high-level foraging. Thanks to Belmaya, Ed learned about edible fruits, mushrooms, and herbs. Priceless survival knowledge. His efficiency skyrocketed. He had meat, fish, and now proper farming knowledge. Even his magic had improved. Both fire and wind magic had reached level 10. He only knew basic spells, but his repeated use of them had pushed his survival skills to their peak. For the first time, he realized something. I'm actually starting to enjoy this. Then, the sky turned black. A massive lightning bolt struck down, obliterating his shelter. Coughing from the impact, Ed stared in despair at the ruins of his home. Everything was completely destroyed. As he turned, he spotted Lucy face down in the dirt. "I almost died," she wheezed. Ed groaned. "What now?" Ed stood up in shock. "What do you mean you almost died?" Lucy, sprawled out in the dirt like a discarded rag doll, barely mustered the energy to explain. Apparently she had skipped class, business as usual, only this time Belmaya had taken notice. "She got all serious and started walking toward me with her fists clenched really tight," Lucy groaned. "I panicked and teleported away before she could reach me. Looked like it would hurt." Then, as if she hadn't just casually mentioned a near-death experience, she added, "Anyway, do you have any jerky?" Ed lost it. "You blew up my entire shelter, and now you want a snack?" He hurled a stick at her, hitting her square in the head. "Ouch!" Ed narrowed his eyes. "No magic barrier?" "I'm completely out of mana," Lucy whined. Ed cracked his knuckles. "Is that so? First, this one's for my shelter." He flipped her off. "And this one's for Belmaya, you ungrateful gremlin." But as much as he wanted to continue lecturing Lucy on why she was the worst, his survival came first. He needed a house, a proper one. He headed to the library for research, gathering books on architecture, materials, and construction methods. As he worked late into the night, a voice suddenly interrupted him. "You're studying really hard." He looked up to see Elka Island, an apprentice librarian. She hesitated before saying, "Seeing someone this dedicated, it really inspired me." Ed immediately picked up on her social cues. She was waiting for him to introduce himself. With a sigh, he obliged. "Ed Roth Staler." Her eyes widened in shock. "Yep, there it is." The usual reaction. She quickly recovered, though, and admitted, "You're very different from the rumors. I struggled with those magic books, but you read through them in days." Ed shrugged, used to these misunderstandings. "Well, I'll be rooting for you," Elka said cheerfully. Just as she turned to leave, a sudden rumble shook the library. Bookshelves trembled, and one was about to crash directly onto her. At that exact moment, the final event of Act 1 began, the GlassCon disaster. Across the academy, students gathered in emergency meeting points. Ayla, Pania, and Tae-Lee discussed the crisis. Glascan, The highest-ranking spirit of darkness had been summoned. The culprit? Yenneker, or rather, she was being controlled by Velosper, another high-ranking dark spirit. The Academy's strongest students were forming a plan, but they faced overwhelming odds. Two berserk high-ranking spirits, Velosper and Takan, blocking their way, a horde of lesser spirit monsters, and an impregnable barrier surrounding the student hall. Worse still, the professors and headmaster were absent. If they waited for backup, it would be too late. Pania, remembering Ed's words, "Perhaps you should try to take it easy," faced the heavy burden of command. But there was no choice. "We move in 1 hour," she declared. "Only those from Class A and the top students will go. Everyone, prepare." Then, a student rushed in, breathless. "Princess, there are still students trapped in the library." She hesitated before naming one. Elka Eidlin. Ziggs Lortel, one of the strongest combatants, reacted instantly. "Did you just say Elka?" The student nodded. "She's still inside, along with one other second-year—" Ziggs, hearing his childhood friend's name, turned to bolt toward the library, but Pania and Lortel blocked his path. "Wait," Pania said. "You said there was someone else with Elka, right?" Ziggs grabbed the girl by the shoulders. "Who? Who else is in there?" The girl hesitated before mumbling. "Ed Roth-Staler." The room fell silent. Pania, trying to maintain control, suggested, Maybe we trust Ed." But the moment his name left her lips, everyone stiffened. Without another word, Ziggs launched himself into the air, rocketing toward the library. His mind was set. "If you even touched a single hair on Elka's head, Roth-Staler, I will end you." Ziggs Lortel's life was anything but ordinary. Born into the savage northern grasslands, where the Empire's laws held no power, survival was all he knew. His childhood was spent hunting, scavenging, and ensuring that at the end of the day, his neck was still attached. He was abandoned, left to fend for himself, and knew nothing but the life of a beast. Until one fateful day, a little girl, Elka Eidlin, approached him. "You're like a wolf walking on 2 legs, she had said, laughing. It was the first time Ziggs realized he was alone. Taken in by Elka and her father, he slowly learned the ways of civilization. The savage beast became a man. But if it meant protecting her, he would become a beast again without hesitation. Back in the present, Ziggs stormed toward the library, cutting through monsters in his path. He had heard the rumors about Ed Roth-Staler, a cheater, a coward, a disgrace. If that guy so much as laid a hand on Elka, he was dead. But when he arrived, he found something unexpected. Ed, injured, collapsed on the ground. Grabbing him by the collar, Ziggs demanded, "Where is Elka?" Ed, clearly exhausted, managed to mutter, "3rd floor, reading room." Without another word, Ziggs sprinted inside. He found Elka unconscious, unharmed. But it wasn't luck that had saved her. The entire area had been fortified. Bookshelves were moved to form a barricade. Blackout curtains blocked spirit visibility, and a note was left behind. "When you wake up, don't panic. Stay put. Everything will be solved before dawn. Don't provoke the spirits. Prioritize your safety." Ziggs noticed something else. A blood-stained sweater draped over her. Not Elka's. Ed's. That guy, despite being injured himself, had gone out of his way to protect Elka. Why? Ziggs didn't know what to make of it, but he clenched his fists. He had misjudged him. Meanwhile, Ed lay on the ground, staring at the ceiling. Damn, that was close. 3 hours earlier, he had saved Elka from a collapsing bookshelf, then quickly realized the event was progressing faster than expected. By now, the Glaskiness showdown had begun, which meant Talee was already in the middle of it. Ed had planned to stay uninvolved, but, well, things never went according to plan. Seeing an opportunity, he used the chaos to train, sharpen his survival skills, and even push his spirit magic to level 7. But now, as he lay there, exhausted from the ordeal, Ziggs approached him. "What are you doing here?" Ed, too exhausted to come up with a lie, simply answered, "Training." Ziggs snorted. Only the most naive people would believe that. Then, to Ed's surprise, Ziggs smirked. "I see. I finally understand the kind of person you are. I owe you one, Senior Ed. When the time comes, I'll repay this debt, at any cost." Ed paused, remembering that Elka was deeply important to Ziggs, but right now, his role was to stick with Talee until the very end. "Now that you've confirmed Elka's safety, go back and do your job." Hurry and help Taylor. If you do as I say, everything will work out for the best. Ziggs, slightly confused, frowned. Taylor? You mean Taylor McClure? Ed nodded. Yeah, the guy who's barely passing his classes. Ziggs scoffed. Well, I don't know why you think so highly of him. I've never even talked to him. Ed, keeping his thoughts to himself, knew it wasn't about Taylor's current abilities. It was about how crucial he was for this fight. He was the only one who could break through the hardened hide of the high-ranking fire spirit, Tarkhan. Using Elemental Slash, a skill he was supposed to learn in Chapter 9 of Act 1. But, in this timeline, as Ziggs nodded in thanks and ran off, Ed blinked, realization sinking in. Wait, what? Ziggs had never befriended Taylor, meaning Taylor never learned the move. The timeline was already falling apart. If Taylor never learned Elemental Slash, that meant no one on their team could damage Tarkhan. At the student center, the first invasion attempt had already failed. Injuries were piling up, and Pania's forces were starting to lose morale. We'll need reinforcements, someone suggested, but Pania shook her head. We can't afford to wait. We'll have to take Tarkhan down with the people we have. And then Ed showed up. Everyone turned in shock. What is he doing here? Ed sighed, already hating what he was about to do. We don't have time to waste. If we don't act now, the summoning ritual will be complete. He exhaled sharply, then muttered, this was the last thing he wanted to do, but he had no choice. His eyes locked onto Pania. Let's split the raid team in two. I'll take charge of one side. Silence. Ed had spent so much effort avoiding the main plot, staying in the background where he belonged, but at this rate, the story was collapsing in on itself. If he didn't step in now, everything would spiral out of control. It was time to interfere. The raid party fell into silence before Clabius immediately protested, shouting, Are you kidding me? You think this is a joke? But before tensions could rise further, Ziggs cut in. Shut up and listen first. Ed wasted no time explaining. They didn't need to defeat Tarkhan, the high-ranking fire spirit summoned by Yennecar. That was impossible with their current group. Instead, they only needed to lure it away long enough for the others to reach Yennecar and break Velosper's control over her. But the risk was high. If the luring team failed, Tarkhan would turn back, forcing them to fight both Tarkhan and Velosper at once. Lortel crossed her arms. That's a gamble. What if the distraction fails? Ed stared at her. Then we all die. But do you have any other ideas? Everyone was silent. Finally, Pania stepped forward. I still don't understand your intentions, she admitted, but I see no flaws in your strategy. We'll follow it. Then, raising her voice, she gave the final command. This is my order as Pania Elias Crowell, third princess of the Crowell Empire. We divide the raid into two groups. Do not die. As they moved into position, Lortel turned to Ed. So, what's your plan for distracting Tarkhan? Ed smirked. Stick to the plan. As they entered the combat training hall, Tarkhan roared, its fiery eyes locking onto them. Clabius, already regretting every life choice, turned around, only to find that Ed and Lortel were gone. You absolute bastards! He screamed as Tarkhan charged straight for him. Meanwhile, outside, Lortel had taken her real position, using a massive explosion to blow open a path for the subduing team to reach Yennecar. What are you waiting for? This is your chance, she yelled. At the same time, Clabius, still running for his life, vowed revenge. I won't let you two get away with this. But Lortel quickly realized the problem. Even if they succeeded, she and Clabius were still stuck with Tarkhan. Eventually, it would stop chasing and return to kill them all. We can't just keep running forever, she snapped at Ed. We need to kill Tarkhan. Ed smirked, pulling out a small pouch. Don't worry. I have a plan. While all of this was happening, Ed had one final ace up his sleeve. The reason Tarkhan was invincible wasn't its strength. It was its indestructible hide. And there was only one way to break through it. Overwhelming firepower. Enter Lucy Mayriel. While everyone had been fighting for their lives, Lucy had been napping. Through everything. It seemed absurd, but Ed pieced together why. Yennecar's breakdown had made Bellamaya anxious, and in turn, Bellamaya had hunted Lucy down for skipping class. Lucy had wasted all her magic running away, leaving her completely out of mana and unconscious when the final boss fight began. The game had intentionally kept her from interfering. Too bad Ed wasn't going to let that happen. Rushing toward her, he shook her awake. Lucy, I need you to... I smell jerky, she mumbled sleepily. Ed shoved jerky into her mouth. Eat now. She barely managed the weak. You're so mean, before Ed grabbed her and hurled her directly at Tarkin. Lucy, go! Mid-air, her magic ignited. Divine judgment. A blinding light erupted, shattering Tarkin's indestructible hide with a massive explosion. Ed grinned. In other words, our attacks work now. Of course, taking down Tarkin would also come with an enormous amount of experience. He had come this far. He wasn't about to let that go to waste. I'm taking the kill! Yennecar had always been the pride of her peers, someone who carried the weight of expectations with a smile. As the subduing team burst into the nail hall, she instinctively greeted them with her usual cheerful tone, masking the turmoil raging within her. Meanwhile, outside, Ed and Lortel stood over Tarkan's barely conscious form. Where's Lucy? Ed asked. Lortel glanced toward a rolling heap in the corner. Somewhere over there. Ed sighed. He had hoped Lucy would finish things off, but she was completely drained. Never mind, he muttered. We'll handle this ourselves. Lortel wiped her brow, frustrated. I've already landed 2 ice-class magic attacks on Tarkin, and it's still holding on. That thing's built like a fortress. Ed cracked his neck. You need to cut its neck. Your magic isn't suited for that. I'll do it. Lortel scoffed. You're in the magic department, just like me. Shouldn't we leave that to Clebius? He actually has a sword. Ed stared at her. Do you really think he can do it? Lortel didn't even hesitate. No. Exactly. Trust me. Just slow Tarkin down while I go for the kill. Lortel chuckled. You've got no problem putting your life in other people's hands, but you expect them to trust you just like that? Ed smirked. This isn't a gamble. Gambling is betting money. This is an investment. Lortel raised an eyebrow. Investment, huh? That's my specialty. I guess I do prefer you over the princess. At least you don't act like a soldier with imperial backing. She sighed. Fine. Since you're so eager to throw your life away, I'll entrust mine to you. With that, Ed charged in. Both he and Tarkan were at their limits. He could feel it. This was the final stretch. As he prepared his attack, he noticed something in the sky. A massive hand emerged, signaling the climax of Tale's battle against Glasscon. This was proof that the story was progressing as it should. Unfortunately, the timing was terrible. Everyone was momentarily distracted. The fire spirit began its counterattack, but before it could land a hit, Lortel intervened, blocking the blow with her magic. She didn't miss her chance, and neither will I. Ed activated Wind Slash. He had used this spell thousands of times before. He lunged forward, cutting clean through Tarkin's neck. The notification popped up immediately. You have defeated the high-ranking fire spirit, Tarkin. Spiritual understanding has increased. Resonance has increased. You can now form a spirit contract. Ed barely had time to process it before his eyes flicked to the battlefield, where Tale struck the finishing blow against Glasscon. The fight was over. As the dust settled, Lortel exhaled. I've met a lot of people who talk big about putting their lives on the line. Most of them turned out to be cowards. Ed, still catching his breath, chuckled. Right. Later, as the distraction team rested beneath a tree, Lortel extended her hand. Let's do this properly this time. She introduced herself again. Lortel Kehaland. She had tried to buy his loyalty with 3 gold coins before, but now she handed them to him without expecting anything in return. Looks like I won this time, Ed. Ed took the coins with a smirk. Yeah, you got me. As she walked away, she glanced back. I'll see you again, won't I? I really don't want to get involved with her, Ed thought, but before he could slip away, Tale arrived. I resent you, Tale said, eyes burning with renewed determination. Ed could immediately tell. Tale had awakened his swordmaster skills, just like in the game. He looked cool now. Tale continued. But still, I owe you. He bowed deeply. Thank you. Before Ed could respond, Clebius intervened. Don't bow to this backstabbing bastard. He nearly got me killed. Clara slapped him on the head. Be quiet. Then, Pania, ever the royal, stepped forward. I should report your deeds to the student council, but Ed cut her off. No need. Lucy did most of the damage to Tarkan, and Tale took down both Velosper and Glasscon. Give them the credit. But Elvira wasn't having it. Oh, stop! Everyone saw what you did. Are you embarrassed or something? Ziggs intervened, shooting her a look. Be polite to your elders. Ed ignored them, but as he watched the main cast interact, he felt something odd, something warm. He had spent so much time trying to stay out of the story, but seeing them grow stronger with every struggle, watching them develop into the people they were meant to be, it felt good. Taylor, the steadfast protagonist, would rise to every challenge. Ayla would become stronger for his sake. Pania would mature into a true ruler. Ziggs would forge his place in civilization. Klebius would gain confidence. Elvira would realize life isn't just about entertainment. And Lortel would begin to question her obsession with money. They were all main characters. They had roles to play. And at the end of it all, success awaited them. Ed turned away. He had his own role to play. The fight was over, but Ed found himself drawn to the training hall. This was where Lucy had napped during joint combat training. In the game, he had never returned to this point. It was beyond where he had ever gone before. But something felt missing. To make sure the spotlight is on the protagonist, someone has to stay backstage. Yennecar had always pushed herself to meet expectations, but the weight of everyone's admiration had become suffocating. The root of her downfall wasn't just Velasper's influence, it was her inability to say no. She had tried to repay every act of kindness with relentless hard work, but that desperation to meet everyone's expectations had ultimately crushed her. As Ed opened the box where she was hiding, Yennecar admitted, "I thought someone might come looking for me, but they all forgot about me so quickly." Ed sighed. "That's your own fault for hiding." She smiled, though it was strained. "I guess I can't deny that. I just wanted a moment to cry." The spirits gathered around her, drawn to her emotions. It was the first time Ed had ever seen something like this. "So, this is why Marilda told me to save her. Not because he knew the future, but because he was the only one who didn't treat her like some untouchable saint." As Yennecar finally broke down, the spirits embraced her, proving that even in failure, her journey was beautiful. Ed quietly whispered, "You did great." A notification popped up. His spiritual resonance had reached level 10. Even the high-ranking wind spirit, Marilda, had taken a special interest in him. Days passed, and Yennecar faced disciplinary action. She pleaded guilty and was prepared for the worst, but her friends and professors stood by her. Even Princess Pania intervened, arguing that Velosper had controlled Yennecar against her will. Meanwhile, Lortel stepped in to cover the reconstruction costs, in exchange for a profitable tax cut. In the end, Yennecar lost her financial support, was suspended for 20 days, and was kicked out of Aphelis Hall, but she avoided expulsion. It felt like the dramatic finale to a teen drama. To cheer her up, Clara and the others planned a small gathering, with strict instructions. Do not mention Glaskin. Do not pity her. Talk about anything else. But before they could even start, Yennecar suddenly blurted, "What's the difference between liking and loving someone?" Clara nearly choked. "Where is this coming from?" Yennecar stammered. "Oh, it's about a friend. She keeps dreaming about a boy she likes. My friend does. Not me. Definitely not me." The group stared. "Yennecar, you've been on probation. You haven't seen anyone for 10 days. Before anyone could respond, Anis abandoned ship, running for her life. Clara, now alone with Yennecar, carefully chose her words. Feelings like that are complicated. But if your friend is confused, the best thing she can do is be honest with herself." Yennecar nodded, deep in thought, then suddenly bolted away. Clara sighed in relief. Crisis averted. Meanwhile, Ed spotted Yennecar and thought about how he had been avoiding her. But with Act 1 over, she was no longer the final boss, which meant he could finally interact with her freely. But when he finally approached her, Yennecar froze, panicked, and hid behind a tree. I have things to do. Bye." And just like that, she was gone. Ed stood there, soul leaving his body. I somehow managed to scare off Yennecar. Amazing. With his tuition secured for next semester, thanks to Pania, Ed threw himself into building a proper home, one that wouldn't collapse on him like his last disaster of a shelter. Day 1, he cleared the land. Day 3, he gathered lumber. Day 18, he had a crisis, wondering if anyone in history had used Windslash as much as he had just to chop wood. Day 27, Bellamaya stopped by, and Ed casually brought up Yennecar, mentioning that she might hate him for some reason. However, Bellamaya just gave him a confused look. Ed had no idea why. Day 31. A wall collapsed. The structure was unstable. This sucks. Day 37. Zig showed up to help. Finally, something's going right. Day 45. With the roof and walls finally up, a notification appeared. New crafted item, log cabin. Sitting on the floor of his newly built cabin, Ed took in his work with satisfaction. I finally have a house. But as he sat there, basking in the accomplishment, he felt a gaze on him. Yennecar stood a short distance away, hands clenched at her sides. She looked like she wanted to say something.
This video isn't free. It'll cost you just one subscribe, and I'm just gonna flip this around and ask you a couple of questions. You know we appreciate tips in the form of likes and comments if you feel like it.